Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Creative for Christ's Work. We are back continuing our Young and Mighty series, and we are finishing off with Joseph. We have seen what Joseph has been through in the last 3 episodes, and now it's time to finish and close the book on Joseph. After this episode, we will begin on a new Young and Mighty character, and if you hear me cough or sniffle in the middle of the podcast, I've been having sinus issues a little lately. That's also why it's been that's also why I uploaded the podcast a little late, so I apologize, but I still gotta get this out. Still gotta get this episode out. With that said, let's move on to our story. Let me give you now, for those of you who haven't watched the past few episodes of Joseph, I'll give you a recap of the story up to now. The recap will help you more if you watch the past 3 episodes. But if you just want to hear the recap without watching the episodes, that's fine. But I would really recommend you watch the previous episodes. So here it is. Joseph is the second youngest of 12 boys by his father Jacob. Jacob, Joseph's father, favored Joseph more than his other sons. This made Joseph's brothers very angry and envious, except for the youngest brother, Benjamin. His father favored him so much that he made him a coat of many colors. Joseph had 2 dreams. Each of the dreams involved his brothers and his father bowing down to him. This made his brothers even more angry. The brothers hated Joseph to the point where they threw him in a pit and even wanted to kill him. Then eventually they decided to sell him to some merchants for 20 pieces of silver. The merchants eventually brought Joseph to Egypt and sent him to Egypt, to where one of Pharaoh's high-ranking officials, Potiphar, bought him and put him to work. Joseph found favor in Potiphar's sight in his house. In return for his work, Potiphar respected Joseph and made him the highest person in his house. Potiphar's wife even noticed Joseph, but in a more negative way. She thought Joseph was handsome, and she lusted after him even though she was married. She wanted him to sleep with her and have sex with her. And she wanted it to be secretly hidden from Potiphar. But Joseph's integrity made him refuse to lie down with her. She eventually lied on him out of frustration for his refusal and said he wanted to have sex with her, and to say he wanted to have sex with her and that he tried to harass her. Her lie eventually put him in prison. In prison, Joseph met 2 prisoners, the butler and the baker, each had 2 different dreams. God helped Joseph interpret the dreams of the butler and the baker. The butler's dream meant that he would be forgiven for his crime and that he would get his job back. The baker's dream meant that when Pharaoh's birthday came, that he would be murdered for his crime and basically executed. Both dreams came true. In the Bible, in Joseph's story, you can see he's known as a dream interpreter, though it wasn't him. He acknowledged that it wasn't him who interpreted dreams, but it was God who helped him interpret dreams. When the butler got out of prison, Joseph asked him to share his innocence with Pharaoh. He promised, but he eventually forgot, and Joseph was still in prison for 2 years. So here he is promising he would bring up Joseph up back to Pharaoh, and it's been 2 years since he made that promise, and he completely forgot about him and just got his job back. Eventually, Pharaoh had 2 dreams that he could not grasp. He had asked his magicians what the dreams meant, but they couldn't understand the dreams. He asked if there was anyone in all of Egypt who could understand the dreams. The butler finally remembered Joseph and mentioned him to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked to bring Joseph to him. Pharaoh explained his dreams to Joseph, and God showed Joseph the meaning of the dreams, and Joseph shares God's interpretation given to him. Pharaoh's dreams meant that in Egypt there will be 7 years of plenteous and fruitful land and harvest. And then after those 7 years of plenteous, there will be 7 years of terrible famine in Egypt. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of preparing for the 7 years of famine during the 7 years of harvest, since he couldn't interpret his dream. This now leads to our story. The recap's over. Eventually, the 7 years of famine came, and it struck not only Egypt. Far away from Egypt, the land of Canaan has been affected by the famine. In the land of Canaan, Joseph's family still lived there even many years later. Jacob, Joseph's father, asked his sons to go down to Egypt and get food that they might survive the famine. So the brothers, except for Benjamin, the youngest, went down to Egypt to get food. During the famine, Joseph gave the people food to survive the terrible famine. While Joseph was giving out the food, Joseph saw 10 men that looked familiar. Then he realized it was his brothers. After all these years, Joseph hadn't seen his brothers since they sold him into Egypt. And even after all these years, Joseph wondered, could his brothers have changed since he last saw them? In order to find out if his brothers were changed from the last time, he couldn't let his brothers know it was him. In Genesis 42, 7 through 14, here's how the situation happened. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We have come to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. They didn't recognize him. And he remembered the dreams he had about them many years before. He said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "No, my lord," yet they exclaimed. "Your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men, sir. We are not spies." "Yes, you are," Joseph insisted. "You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "Sir," they said, "there are actually 12 of us. We, your servants, are all brothers, sons of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now, and one of our brothers is no longer with us." But Joseph insisted, "As I said, you are spies. This is how I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true. By the life of Pharaoh, if it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies." So basically we see here that in the land of Canaan, that his brothers came back, but in order to make sure they didn't know it was him and to determine if they had changed or not, he disguised himself and pretended that they were spies. And they basically said they weren't spies. But to make sure that they had changed over the years, he asked them questions like, is his father still alive? And is this all, are these all the brothers, basically? And they basically told him that there was a younger brother still in Canaan. And he told them to go get one of them to go get the youngest brother while the rest of the brothers stay in prison in Egypt. So Joseph kept his identity hidden. Joseph kept his brothers in prison with him, and he told them to bring, and he told the one brother that went to go bring his youngest son, the man's youngest son, Jacob, back to Egypt. So the brothers came back to Canaan and told their father that they needed Benjamin. Jacob did not want Benjamin to go to Egypt. He thought that he knew he had already lost Joseph. He was not going to lose another son. However, he came to the conclusion and decided to let the brothers take him to Egypt. Before Joseph's brothers came back to Egypt, he had the soldiers to fill the sacks of grain that he would give the brothers for the famine. Then he would give them a secret assignment. He had them secretly put his cup in Benjamin's sack, so that way it could look like they stole it. And here's why. He still tested, and he wanted to make it like he wanted this to happen because he still was testing to see if they had changed or not. When the brothers came back to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph gave each of the brothers their sacks of grain. As they rode off in Genesis 44, 4 through 17. Here's what happened next. But when they had gone only a short distance and were barely out of the city, Joseph said to his palace manager, "Chase after them and stop them. When you catch up with them, ask them, 'Why have you repaid my kindness with such evil? Why have you stolen my master's silver cup, which he uses to predict the future? What a wicked thing you've done.'" When the palace manager caught up with the man, he spoke to them as he had been instructed. "What are you talking about?" The brothers responded. "We are servants, and we would never do such a thing. Didn't we return the money we found in our sacks? We brought it back all the way from the land of Canaan. We would never steal silver or gold from your master's house. If you find his cup with any one of us, let that man die, and all the rest of us, my lord, will be your slaves." "That's fair," the man replied, "but the only one who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go free." They all quickly took their sacks from the backs of their donkeys and opened them. The palace manager searched the brothers' sacks from the oldest to the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers saw this, they tore their clothing in despair. Basically, right here, if when the Bible mentions that when a man tears his clothes or rips it wide open to where their chest was shown, that was a sign of mourning and grief and sadness. Then they loaded their donkeys again and returned to the city. Joseph was still in his palace when Judah and his brothers arrived, and they fell to the ground before him. "What have you done?" Joseph demanded. "Don't you know that a man like me can predict the future?" Judah answered, "Oh, my lord, what can we say to you? How can we explain this? How can we prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins. My lord, we have all returned to be your slaves, all of us, not just our brother who had your cup in his sack." "No," Joseph said, "I would never do such a thing. Only the man who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go back to your father in peace." And also, one thing to notice here, when his brothers came back to Egypt, the first time he saw them, they bowed down before him. Because, he was a high-ranking member of Pharaoh's kingdom. And this was key that Joseph dreamed that when in his dream that his brothers bowed down to him, it was basically like the dream had been fulfilled. So basically, it was a dream and a prophecy. But continuing the story in Genesis 47:18 through 33, here's what one of the brothers says. Then Judah stepped forward and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant say just one word to you. Please do not be angry with me, even though you are as powerful as Pharaoh himself. My lord, previously you asked us, your servants, 'Do you have a father or a brother?' And we responded, 'Yes, my lord. We have a father who is an old man, and his youngest son is a child of his old age. His full brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him very much. And you said to us, "Bring him here so I can see him with my own eyes." But we said to you, my lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for his father would die. But you told us, unless your youngest brother comes with you, you will never see my face again." So we returned to your servant, our father, and told him what you said. Later when he said, "Go back again and buy us more food," we replied, "We can't go unless you let our youngest brother go with us. We'll never get to see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us." Then my father said to us, "As you know, my wife had 2 sons, and one of them went away and never returned. Doubtless he was torn to pieces by some wild animal. I have never seen him since. Now, if you take his brother away from me, and any harm comes to him, you will send this grieving white-haired man to his grave. And now, my lord, I cannot go back to my father without the boy. Our father's life is bound up in the boy's life. If he sees that the boy is not with us, our father will die. We, your servants, will indeed be responsible for sending that grieving white-haired man to his grave. My lord, I guaranteed to my father that I would take care of the boy. I told him, if I don't bring him back to you, I will bear the blame forever. So please, my lord, let me stay here as a slave instead of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. For how can I return to my father if the boy is not with me? I couldn't bear to see the anguish this would cause my father. And basically, he tells him that basically he basically told him that those many years ago, he basically told him the story that Joseph, how he sold Joseph to those men, and he basically told him that how he basically showed remorse for his action. All the brothers should basically show regret and remorse for their actions, and they wouldn't want the same thing to happen to Benjamin, his youngest son, because if Jacob found out that his youngest son was not there, that he would die grieving because he couldn't stand to lose the loss of another child. And hearing this, Joseph could not stand to hear any more. He told everyone to leave the room. While he was alone with his brothers, he broke down and wept so loud that you could hear him in Pharaoh's palace. Finally, Joseph told his brothers who he was. His brothers were shocked. In Genesis 50:20, here's how Joseph sums everything he went through. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. Joseph's brothers begged for forgiveness for what they did all those years ago. Joseph forgave them. However, Joseph told his brothers that before he died, that before his father died, he wished to see his father again before he died and before it was too late. So Joseph traveled home to Canaan to Jacob. When Jacob saw Joseph, he cried with tears of joy. Later on, Pharaoh decided to let Joseph's entire family live in Egypt. Since then, Joseph and his family lived in Egypt for the rest of their days. Joseph eventually died at the age of 110, and Joseph is an example of an important lesson we can learn. It is not how you start your story, it's how you end it. Before I leave and close this episode, I want to leave you with a few things to remember from Joseph's story and life, and what you can do to apply it to your life. Number 1, trust in God is key when you are going through hard times. Joseph was thrown in prison, lied on, and sold by his brothers. Yet the Bible states that Joseph trusted in God and God was with him. Do not let anyone tell you that your life is going to be easy. That is not the case. You will have tough trials and tribulations. Trials and constant troubles are a sign that you are a true child of God. However, God is with you, and because you trust Him, you know everything will be all right. Now, you may not be in prison, but you will have a prison-like situation. You may be forced into a situation that you may not have had anything to do with, or you'll be in a situation that others have set up to bring you down. You may be in a situation that you put yourself in, but your trust in God is what keeps you and allows you to persevere in tough times. Number 2, every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. God knows your life before it starts, and He knows your story before it ends. Joseph had a great life, even with the bad things that happened to him. He knew that with everything that happened near the start of his life, God knew exactly how his story would end. Joseph started his story by being sold by his brothers and thrown into prison, and he ended up being a high rank in Egypt and forgave and reunited his family. Your life may have started off to a rough start. You may have started off adopted as an orphan, or you may have been abused all of your life. God still has a wonderful plan for your life. In that life, there are troubles. But when you believe in God, He wants to guide you on your path of life. And finally, number 3, something that was so key to Joseph, and I think everybody needs to know this. Everyone should have a testimony of God's wonder-working power. Joseph's testimony was basically sometimes life sets up a bad situation for us, and God has a way of turning what's bad has a way of making what looks bad and what looks wrong and turning it around for your good and your benefit to the glory of God. And basically, and we can see here, you don't need a testimony. A testimony is basically what is basically the demonstration of God's power in your life, how he changed you, how he changed your life, and how he changed things around you for the good. And with that said, thank you for listening to Created for Christ's Word. Please be sure to like and share. Next time we will continue on our series with our next character. Thank you and see you next time.